What's up guys, it's Will back again, and today's review is Star Trek Beyond. I really do apologize for the delay in me releasing this review, or any review really. I had a couple of really good friends that got married this weekend, and as a groomsman, I was pretty much wrapped up in that process all last week. I also had some friends come down from other states that stayed at my place since last Thursday or so, and I had to show them a fun time as well, so I had no time for any reviews sadly. You can probably also tell my voice is a little hoarse from the wedding, but I think I'll be okay. But the most important thing is that I'm here now, and from henceforth, it's business as usual. So with that said, let's get into my review of Star Trek Beyond. Okay, so Star Trek Beyond is a sci-fi action adventure film that was written by Simon Pegg, who you may know from his work on movies like Shaun of the Dead, and directed by Justin Lin, who you may know from his work on action movies like Fast and Furious 6. Star Trek Beyond is the third installment in this rebooted Star Trek franchise and stars some great actors and actresses like Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, Zoe Saldana, and Idris Elba. This film takes place 3 years into the USS Enterprise's 5-year voyage, and eventually the crew arrives at Starbase Yorktown, where they are told they need help in a rescue mission on the planet of Altamid. While the USS Enterprise heads to Altamid, and they are ambushed by the villainous Krall and his swarm of ships. Some of the crew are taken captive by Krall and his forces, and the others exit the ship in escape pods and hide out on the planet of Altamid and begin to form an escape plan. The rest of the movie is spent trying to escape Krall's grasp and head back to the Federation and send word about Krall and his acts of war. So I'm going to give somewhat of a dissenting opinion on this movie because to me, it wasn't nearly as good as I hoped it would be. I remember when the first trailer came out and most people were really nervous because it looked like pure action and nothing else, which is pretty much classic Justin Lin at this point. And the way the trailer made this movie look is exactly how it is. There was no misrepresentation whatsoever in my opinion. Now this may have been fine if not for the standard and overall tone that were set by the first two films that were directed by J.J. Abrams, which were Star Trek in 2009 and Star Trek Into Darkness in 2013. I did really enjoy both of these films, especially Into Darkness, where Benedict Cumberbatch completely stole the show and ultimately led the way in what was a really enjoyable viewing experience. But Star Trek Beyond felt like pure spectacle just for the sake of spectacle and nothing else, you know, sort of like a Fast and the Furious movie. And the problem lies in the expectation, because if I came into this film expecting a Fast and Furious style movie and that's what I actually got, then I'd be like, okay, I accept it for what it is and I review it based on that. But the problem lies in the fact that the first two films had a very clearly identifiable style that really worked that Star Trek Beyond almost intentionally veers away from. To me, this film desperately missed J.J. Abrams' presence because while it has its good moments, it doesn't come anywhere near the level of the two preceding films. This movie feels more like a side story than it does a full-length installment in this rebooted series. If Star Trek were a video game series, then Star Trek Beyond would be more like a DLC than an actual full-length game. I don't mean that in the actual length respect because this movie is 2 hours long, but I mean it in regards to the main story and the character development. Because there's very little weight to this story and the character development is minimal at best. In the first two films, pretty much all the main characters underwent some sort of growth and maturation process that you were able to see gradually unfold on screen. But in this one, the characters are pretty much exactly who they are the entire movie, and they don't grow at all, really. There's no progression of them, and there's not really that much meaningful interaction between them either that really gives you an idea of their personality and potential depth as a character. The story's stakes just don't feel as high either. Yes, the villain of this movie, Krall, wants to destroy the Federation, and a lot of people do die, but it doesn't seem to have the same weight that the first two films did. When innocent people die, you don't really feel the same sadness that you probably did from the first two films, because in this movie you get very little time with the villain Krall, and when he does bad shit, you really have little reasoning as to why. The movie tries to gradually feed you little tidbits about Krall and his backstory, but what ultimately ends up happening is that you as the viewer are hit with all the pertinent info at the very end of the film. When villains do bad things and you're given time with them to see how menacing or evil they are, those deaths mean more, and you just don't get that here. Don't let me give you the wrong idea though. This movie was disappointing, but it's not a complete and absolute train wreck that had nothing go right. The action sequences in this film were incredibly impressive visually, and they add a lot of excitement to the story that really lacks it in many ways. There's some fight scenes that are absolutely amazing to watch unfold on screen, and these are the moments that save this movie from complete devastation for me. The visuals in Star Trek movies are always fantastic, but this time around they look possibly even more visually impressive than the first two, which is a major compliment in my eyes. The dialogue was decent, I guess, but like I said, there's not too much exploration into these characters' identities and what they mean to this story. There's enough solid dialogue to make the story progress mostly fluid fluently without anything feeling silly or cheesy. Okay, so the acting in this movie was mostly pretty good. It was really sad for me to watch Anton Yelchin for the last time on screen, but his character Chekhov is just a really awesome one that brought a lot to these 3 Star Trek films. He gave a great performance in this film, but it was definitely tough to watch him in his final role. I'm actually a big Chris Pine fan, and I think he does a really great job as Captain Kirk. I can't say that I watched the old Star Trek show and movies, so I don't really have another Kirk to compare him to, but I think he's really well suited for this role. Him and Zachary Quinto, who plays Commander Spock, have a ton of chemistry on screen together, and this relationship is usually one of the better parts of these Star Trek films. In this film, however, there's not very much tension at all between those two, and they don't really interact all that much. So don't expect much classic Kirk and Spock tension like you usually get if you plan on going to see this movie. The rest of the supporting cast amid the Enterprise were all their usual selves mostly. Zoe Saldana is great in her role of Uhura, but she's barely in this movie. Simon Pegg is pretty funny and shined once again in the role of Montgomery Scott, and Karl Urban as Leonard McCoy, the witty and sarcastic doctor of the Enterprise, was funny and interesting as usual. So Sofia Boutella is a newcomer to the series, and she plays Jayla, an alien scavenger who eventually teams up with the crew members of the Enterprise. She's actually a pretty awesome character, but the way in which she joins forces with the crew felt pretty forced. She does do some awesome fighting and shows she has some amazing capabilities at her disposal that result in some very impressive action sequences though. And finally, Idris Elba's character, the main villain, Krall. I don't think the shortcomings of Krall are Idris Elba's fault because he's such a great actor who's played a number of roles at a very high level. There are times in which he does cool things that will have you excited for things to come regarding his character, but then Krall just never hits the level of villainy that you hoped he would. He's super cliche and pretty underdeveloped as a villain. He's very similar in execution to Apocalypse from the newest X-Men film. Not in the way that he's like so powerful he's boring, it's mostly in the fact that you put a great actor behind a sheet of prosthetics and makeup and you have them spout lengthy and at times boring dialogue through these long monologues and speeches. At the end of the film, the crew figures out Krall's backstory and motivations and you're just like, that seems super flimsy and doesn't add much to Krall in the compelling department. There are definitely things in this movie that will happen with little to no explanation and you just kind of have to go along with them in a way that will probably leave you with more questions than answers. But yeah, Krall as a villain was pretty disappointing and it's sad that such a great actor got placed in a pretty stale role. A disappointing villain does not bode well for this kind of film. Okay, so overall I was pretty disappointed with this film, although it had some redeeming qualities for sure. I thought it had good acting and a good cast, some amazing action sequences and visual effects, and mostly solid dialogue overall. Sadly, I also felt the film had a pretty bland story, a complete lack of character development, a cliche and disappointing villain, and very little tension or suspense. I'm gonna give this movie a 6.5 out of 10 and say that you should pass on this one in theaters and catch it on Redbox in 4 months or so. So did you guys see Star Trek Beyond yet? What did you think of it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if not, let me know whether this is your kind of movie or not. And as always, if you like this video, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe to my channel for much more content like this. That's all for now. This is WillFoxification signing off. See you in the next review.